First of all, thanks for everybody for coming out here. As always, if you've been to one of our webinars, you know the game. Absolutely put some chat questions, whatever you've got on it, and we'll try to get to them. However, this is a 30 by 30, and what we mean by that is the first 30 minutes is going to be, sadly, me talking and going on and on, followed by then we open up the mics, the cameras, everything, and we really want to have give and take. So it's not your traditional Q&A in the sense that we're not basically just saying, ask Bob and he will. No, this is where we really want to have people talking and sharing ideas and concepts and concerns. And one last thing is that the first 30 minutes will be presented or will be posted up on YouTube. However, we do not record and post the second half. So we keep that a little more, so that people are a little more comfortable saying whatever they want to say. So with that, this is going to be a little bit different than a lot of cybersecurity webinars, because we are not going to dig in and talk about specifics about CMMC or NIST or HIPAA, PCI, any of that sort of thing. What we're really going to talk about instead is the change that's happening in terms of requirements that are being placed onto organizations and where those requirements are coming from, and a little bit of what they are, not from a technical standpoint, but from an expectation standpoint. Because we've been watching over the past few months, we're seeing a lot more requirements. And I think this is the tip of the iceberg. So I wanted to basically just do a quick overview, which will hopefully prepare people to deal more with their security requirements and prepare them for the future and all that. So with that, yada, 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 Simplex IT, aren't we wonderful? We did actually get recognized recently for the MSP 501. This is like the 6th time we've been recognized. And we actually moved up. These are the top 501 managed service providers as recognized by one of the industry leaders. This is vendor neutral, by the way, and we actually moved up almost 100 notches. We're 346 or something along those lines, which we're really happy about, blah, blah, blah. Again, we do both what we call traditional or pure MSP, where we're the entire IT department, both tactically and strategically for organizations, as well as co-managed IT services, where we partner with existing internal IT folks. We're equally comfortable, and we pretty much wrote the book on this one. Comfortable on both. Yay, we've got my 3 books. Aren't those wonderful? Now, let's get to the meat of the matter. First of all, one of the things I want people to understand is that organizations are going to be receiving more and more security requirements from their stakeholders. What I mean by stakeholders, we're talking traditional organizational stakeholders. So we're talking about vendors, about clients, about employees, about service providers, especially insurance companies, and soon to be, I think, banks. I think we're going to see more and more requirements being placed, and the requirements are going to have several manifestations. And the nutshell of that is security is becoming less voluntary for businesses and organizations. We have been able to go through the world for the past 10, 15 years or so by simply saying, yeah, we're too small, or we can't have that much, it's not going to be that big of a deal, or whatever. And as long as we weren't impacted, organizations could get away with that. It's becoming less and less voluntary. There are definitely, depending upon the state and country that you're not only located in, but also doing business in, you're going to find more and more requirements as time goes on. This is especially true if your organization deals with GDPR, basically any companies in the European Union. Also, states such as Massachusetts and California are having their requirements in place, and this is going to become more and more so. And leading the charge so far has been primarily government, with larger organizations, especially if you're involved with automotive or the like. However, we're starting to see more and more insurance companies, and we're going to talk specifically about a couple of examples of that. So it's essentially the it's not government only or alone. And to a certain degree, when it's government as a customer, not government as a mothership. The requirements, I think, are going to be relatively simple at first, but I think the complexity is going to be increasing. My suspicion is by the end of next year, I think there's going to be some significant, by today's perspective, I think there's going to be some significant requirements, especially on the insurance side. The whole concept of cyber insurance and cyber liability insurance, and we'll talk about this, I think is going to become much more difficult to get and much more expensive to get. Why is all this happening? Because, and we've talked about this several times, it's the business model from the bad guys' perspective. The bad guys are able to make a ton of money from doing this. So it's, yes, they can cause mayhem. Yes, they can create damage, but most importantly, they can create revenue streams for themselves. And we'll talk a little bit about this. And one of the first numbers I want to show you is why this is happening. And this is the 2020 FBI IC3 report. This is the annual report that the FBI releases. I've quoted some earlier reports in earlier presentations, and look at the growth. Now, keep in mind, these are the ones that are reported to the FBI, which not everyone does, because not everybody wants the publicity of seeing their name potentially in the papers of their data was compromised or the like. It's not the PR. P.T. Barnum was not always right. Not all publicity is good publicity. So if you take a look at it, and the asterisk is essentially talks about some of the, it's in the report, talks about some of the estimation tools that are used. But you can see clearly that the number of complaints are increasing, as are the total losses. Now, total losses does not equate into bad guy revenue. But the bad guy revenue model is extremely profitable. And we did a kind of a weird webinar last month where we kind of pretended, a couple gentlemen in the industry and I pretended to be hackers to show you how simple it is to create an entrepreneurial business model. And this basically gives you an idea that it is working and it is increasing. And as long as the business model works, it's going to continue on this streak. The link down at the bottom is the PDF that I stole this slide from. I suggest if you want to take a look at it. This has nothing to do with vendors. It's not a marketing or a sales pitch or anything. It's just the report from the FBI. Okay. Now, what are the bad guy goals? Now, and I'm not going to go through all this because these webinars for this stuff is a dime a dozen, and it's essentially either increasing value to themselves, which traditionally is money, or access to information or the like, or creating damage to you. But either way, the business model is there with a minimal investment. They get a great return on that investment. So the bad guys are out there, and I truly do believe until this business model is destroyed or significantly damaged, security is not going anywhere. Because why would it? And remember, so many of the players are working out of countries that either fully support and encourage, and in some cases bankroll these processes, or at the very least turn a blind eye, because these are people who are bringing in hard currency into their area. And whether it be through graft or whatever, those countries are not going to cooperate tremendously as far as stopping them. So we're not going anywhere. And the hackers, the bad guys, the criminals, whatever you want to call it, they can come from a number of different places. Nation states, organized crime, hacktivists, blah, blah, anything. So this is why I get back to it's the business model. As long as the business model is as accurate or as effective as it is, security isn't going anywhere. And right now, a majority of our strategies are defensive strategies. All we're trying to do is to increase the cost that the bad guys need to do in order to succeed. Okay, so we're cutting profit margin, but the profit margin is still significant. So I don't think we're doing anything significant yet. There are some pieces you're starting to see a little bit, but so far there's really nothing going on yet that's really going to destroy the business model. There are some exceptions to that. For example, the pipeline hack that the bad guys got a few $1 million in ransom money, and the FBI was able to hack them and basically steal the Bitcoin back. Okay, that cut into very, very directly their profit margin. So that hurt the business model. But that's the exception rather than the rule. Okay, so this is not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go away. And the business model overall is starting to adapt by making requirements, by basically trying to cut down the vulnerability of organizations. So far, the defense has been voluntary, and I just throw up these points there. These are some of the defenses we're all supposed to be doing and all of that kind of fun stuff. Again, this is not our topic, but so far, for the most part, the defense has been voluntary in terms of organizations could choose to do or not to do these strategies. Now, there's some exceptions to this. HIPAA obviously has requirements. PCI has requirements, so on and so forth. But by and large, organizations have not been faced with either strong penalties or complete, business shutdown had they not gone the appropriate levels as far as security goes. But I truly do think we're really going to be hitting with, security as a cost of doing business. I do think that we're going to become more and more to that. And the challenge is going to be, because if we have two organizations that are out there, and both are honest, good, hardworking organizations trying to succeed, and one of them takes security on and truly invests, that company has taken a hit. They've taken a hit in terms of increased cost. They've taken a hit in terms of lowered productivity, because you can't do full security implementation without taking a hit on one or two of those challenges, whereas the other company has not. So from a traditional competitive arena, the company that's not secure has competitive advantage over the company that is secure, strictly looking at it from a competition standpoint. Now, if both of them get hit, it flips completely. The one that was secure is in a much better position to deal with that, whereas the one that is not. But that's a tough road to base the economy of this country on, by basically saying, yay, everybody gets to choose. So I think there's going to be some issues that are going to come, especially for companies that are asked to protect them. For example, this is, and it's a little bit chopped, but this is a letter we are seeing with a lot of our clients who have, or potential clients who have, cyber liability insurance. So this is insurance that they're paying to protect them should they get hacked or the like. And I want you to read the first sentence. Controls described above and listed below are minimum controls that must be in place in order to be eligible for a cyber policy. So what they're basically saying is that if you want to play, you've got to have these features implemented. Now here, all of these pieces are dealing with multi-factor authentication, where essentially not only do you need an account and a password, but you also need a second method to actually authenticate who it is that's accessing a resource. Most of you, I hope, are familiar with this. The most common use of it is for email for Office 365, Microsoft 365, but it's essentially where you put in your email address, your password, and then you either have an application on your phone or you're texted a code and you use that. So, but this is all multi-factor authentication throughout your network. And this particular insurance company is basically saying, if you want to continue to do business with us, you have to have this stuff in place. And then that added to this is, to their policy, If it turns out you make a claim and you didn't have this in place, we're not going to honor that claim. And in addition to that, if you have cyber insurance, and especially if it's cheap, there are probably, and especially if you've renewed over the past year or so, there are probably a ton of things that are basically exceptions exempting the insurance company from paying if you don't have these things, if you're not effectively creating a strong firewall, if you haven't trained your employees, if you haven't done simulated phishing attacks, if you don't have good backup, blah, 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 blah. Now, everybody's policy varies. But you see, so what insurance companies are doing, they're doing two things. One is right out front, for example, these guys, and kudos to them, they're saying you got to have these minimums in place before us to even consider you. But then in the fine print, they're also putting all sorts of exceptions whereby thanks for the premium payments, but they're not going to do you a bit of good because you didn't implement any of the good security policies. Whether or not those omissions were part of the reason that the bad guys got in. This is going to continue, and it's going to get worse or better, you could basically say, because remember those two companies? We have the company that's well protected and the company that's poorly protected. You could see both companies getting the same cybersecurity policy, even though the one who's not protected has absolutely no chance on collecting on a claim because they don't have any of the things in place that's required in the fine print, whereas these guys do. Now, who's the right business strategist? The insurance company, the weak company, or the strong company? Unfortunately, it all depends on what ends up happening. If it turns out nothing happens, then the weak company is really, really smart because they didn't have to do anything. But that's kind of like getting the absolute cheapest health insurance that only covers if you happen to have your left leg broken by a chipmunk. They can do it. They know how. Because in those kind of situations, it's useless unless very unusual or very structured situations happen. So I think you're going to see more and more of this. Are you going to see it with banks? I think so, especially when banks are asked to provide additional credit, whether it be line of credit or loans or whatever kind of investments. And I think also organizations that are asked to invest are going to look, because what's the whole question? Is this a healthy investment? Is this organization a good risk? And up until recently, the question of security health has not been considered a critical question to be answered. But I think it's going to be, if it isn't already, depending upon the market. And when you think about it, the insurance company, they're the canary in the cave, because they're the ones who are going to be asked to pay when something bad happens. So it makes sense that they will be the first ones to say, okay, we're going to insist that these things are in place, that these things are done. But where they go, banks aren't going to be that much further behind. Especially if a company goes and says, hey, we were just compromised from a cybersecurity standpoint, and because of that, we need an additional $500,000 on our line of credit. You wouldn't mind, would you? So I think this is basically starting to happen. Now you'll notice I haven't made any comment about who's responsible for the security, whether the IT security is provided by an organization such as Simplex IT, wonderful organization, or are provided by the internal IT department, because it doesn't matter from this aspect of it. It's a question of not who's doing it, but is it being done, and is it being done properly? And this is basically where we're going. Another example, CMMC. This is more from a requirement based on the supply chain. So CMMC right now, in order to do business, now this is not a legal requirement, this is a requirement in order to do business. So I want to make sure that that difference is there, because actually the automotive industry, as we talked a little bit about it, has some of the same requirements, not quite to the level of the Department of Defense. But essentially what's going to end up happening, or what is happening now, it's in progress, is the supply chain for the Department of Defense, which means not only their vendors, but the vendors, the contractors, but then the subcontractors, 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 depending upon the type of data, all right, whether it's specific about the product, specific about the customer, specific about the design, specific about deployment, all of that kind of fun stuff. But no matter where you are on that chain, you're going to have some level, and in this case it's CMMC, you're going to have some level of CMMC security framework implementation in order to do business in that chain. So if you're 4 or 5 levels deep, you know, from supplier to subcontractor, 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 yada, 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 you may have very simple requirements that pretty much just says, yep, you just have to say, yeah, we're doing it and we're doing a good job. And you're saying that legally, so you can be challenged on it. But you don't have enough data that would be considered a significant breach. On up to, no, all your T's and I's have to be crossed and dotted, depending upon, again, what you have. But the bottom line, though, is the Department of Defense is basically saying you've got to pay to play. You've got to have the security levels in place depending upon the type of relationship that you're going to have, which means that, remember we talked about the two companies, we talked about the weak company, the strong company. The weak company now can't compete. They cannot get a contract with that supply chain because of the requirements. Now, I like this because, again, we're basically saying it's a level playing field or a clear playing field. Now, this has nothing to do with the insurance. This has nothing to do with the bank. Now we're talking about the clients, about the customers. Okay. But you're seeing more and more of that. And actually, the Department of Energy talked about, and I'm not sure they've done this yet, but actually talked about doing something similar. And why would they do that? Oh, right, the pipeline got hacked. So soon after the pipeline got hacked, the Department of Energy started saying, you know, we may have to put that out. So essentially, any of the organizations that have critical supply chain requirements are going to start doing this. The automotive industry has been doing this for a bit, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Okay? For all purposes, the requirements are usually falling under the NIST category, and NIST is kind of a good starting point. We'll talk a little bit about that. So if you think that you're heading in this direction or your industry is heading in this direction, you can get a head start on this by just going after some of the NIST requirements. So how do we present these requirements? Well, and we kind of already talked about this a bit. First of all, we've got it's required of doing business. CMMC, HIPAA, PCI, whatever. Whether, and again, whether or not so PCI, you may be pulling credit card data for payments, but you may be paying a third party to do it, in which case you don't have to have PCI compliance, but they do. And that's fine. You can kick it down the road as far as your supply chain goes. But whoever is doing the actual activity has to be up to snuff. Okay, so required to doing business, CMMC, healthcare, taking credit cards. With the automotive industry, I don't think they have gotten to the point where they're saying you must be NIST compliant or the like, but they are saying especially data retention. They're sticklers on data retention requirements and on especially for email and for other types of conversations. Okay, and then requirements for protection. The insurance is an example. I think you're going to see more and more, and it's going to be, I think, focused on the multi-factor authentication because that is such a low-hanging fruit for the bad guys. So I got a question from Kelly. Do you feel it's our responsibility to ask for the policies to see what the requirements are? Absolutely. Well, depends on your role. If your role is to have any kind of CXO, whether it be CIO, CTO, CEO, COO, MICKEYO, whatever. If you're having any kind of responsibility for the organization, whether it be, again, a virtual CIO type of thing, whatever, then absolutely. You should basically say that either A, I want to look at and review your policy, or B, I want you to assure me that someone who knows has. It can go either way. So, but yeah, because so many people, they just bought the policy. I've got cyber insurance now. Yay, I'm covered. And it turns out it's not that. So yeah, same thing. There's also discounts. It's not all sticks. Some of it's carrots. So you have in some cases where organizations are essentially saying, we will give you a discount if you can show us that you've got, and this is especially true on the cybersecurity training and simulated phishing attacks. I've seen that where they've actually discounted a bit the insurance cost by you basically saying, I've got a cybersecurity training program in place. Okay. And then finally, to Kelly's point, absolutely the vendor loopholes. And this is the nefarious stuff. And especially depending upon the supply chain, because in a lot of cases, when you buy cybersecurity products, congratulations, you just signed a document or a contract or whatever with whatever the provision is. And the provision can be firewalls or endpoint virus protection. I don't care if you're dealing with a managed service provider, or you are the managed service provider, or you're buying it yourself, as an independent organization. The odds are the vendor has lots of language in there, basically releasing them from liability. Okay, and this is especially true if the product isn't configured properly. If you basically put the best lock on your front door, but you leave the back door unlocked, good luck going after the lock manufacturer. Or you prop the door open with a cinder block. So the vendors aren't necessarily there to help you on this. So loopholes are all over the place. I think I may have accidentally duplicated this. So if you're not sure where to start, because remember it's 30 by 30, so we're wrapping up the presentation part. For all users, you should absolutely have multi-factor authentication, at least on email, and cybersecurity training and simulated phishing attacks. But for Office 365, Microsoft 365, or Windows 365, whatever they are, it's included. It's built in there. You just have to implement it. And your employees are going to be annoyed by it. Oh, isn't that a shame? Sorry, welcome to the world. Same thing for cybersecurity training and simulated phishing attacks. Neither of these are expensive. Talk to us if you want to. We can provide either and or both of these. Neither of these are expensive. Both of these go a huge way in terms of providing real protection, but also convincing the people in your supply chain, as well as your insurance and all that kind of fun stuff, that you're serious about this. So your organization, I don't care how big or how small you are, doesn't matter. You should have this in place. The second is, and I can't tell you how often I've said this, at the end of the day, the last line of defense for all IT is a good backup. And to be blunt, probably about a quarter to a third of potential clients, when we take a look at their data, it turns out that the backups aren't legit. Either they're not backing up all of their data, and they're not verifying that the data is backed up, or the data is just as vulnerable as the live data. The backups are just as vulnerable as the live data, which doesn't really help much. So it has to be tested, it has to be encrypted, has to have minimal access, has to be off work in order for this to be legitimate. So here's the test. If whoever's responsible for your backup became evil and did everything they could to delete your backups, would you be able to have any data left over? If that answer is no, your data is vulnerable, because I don't care who you are, everyone is running a risk of being compromised. And then finally, if you are looking for more advanced, kudos for you and your organization, and you're not sure where to start, NIST is a good starting point, 800-171. That's kind of, a lot of the CMMC stuff is based on that, and a lot of the other versions. It's a good place to start. But here's the thing, get a security partner. Get a partner that you can talk to, who's not going to try to sell you everything, and who's really going to be talking to you from a long-term perspective, and you're in it for the long haul. So you're not looking to buy something, and then once you pay that check and that's installed, security is now in place. It's a process. It's a long process. And yeah, we'd love to be that partner. So if you'd like to have a security review, this is not an assessment, this is not an in-deep dive, this is essentially a tabletop discussion with yours truly, and I may bring one of my security guys in with me to just talk about your organization, about security, and get a feel for where you are and where you want to be. Email me, bob@simplex-it.com if you're interested. We'll also give you a dark web report on your email domain. I'll give you a free copy of my books. So that's my sales pitch, and then a reminder. And actually, this is running on my Windows 11 box. And so far, so good. Our next webinar is going to be, and we originally were going to do this as a breakfast and in-place event. We decided not to, but it's going to be on September 23rd, 1 to 2 p.m. We're going to be talking about Windows 11. And if you know us, we're not going to talk about it from the it's wonderful or it's horrible. We're really going to talk about it from a realistic standpoint, including what you need to know from a business standpoint, and if you're the internal IT, what you need to know from a planning standpoint. So far, I got to tell you, with one major exception, the product's actually been pretty good. So love to see you there. Go to simplex-it.com/events, and and that's pretty much it. Last thing, we'd love to get some feedback, book reviews, and I have to point out, this is my oldest granddaughter. This is about 2 years ago, and she's actually leaving for the Navy in 2 weeks, which is ridiculously hard to believe. Where does the time go? Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop the screen share.